Me, your odd man out, and I have a special guest this week. Yeah, I know it's crazy. I actually have a guest. I'm actually doing a show. So, my friend Jack Allen from Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence is coming on the show. He's had me on so many times, and I barely ever even do guests, but I definitely have been wanting to have him on. And I think that most people know him, but for those people that don't, Jack, could you kind of introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about the show and kind of what your kind of line of research is on, or like maybe what your favorite stuff to research is?
Yeah. Well, I think you always use this line, odd man. I'm honored to be on the show. So I'm honored to be on your show for it to change it up. And
Thank you.
basically my show though is I just read a book and do an outline on it. So that's my I am not the smartest guy in the conspiracy world. Oddman's read way more books than I have, been doing it much longer, but that's my so I usually just pick topics that they're all over the place, but I've been recently medieval time. That's like I'm good with that, and like 1800s, some World War II, but usually yeah. So that's the basis of my show is just the reading and giving a little outline to save people some time who maybe don't like to read.
Well, I think that's great, man. And you kind of do where, because I really wanted to kind of go in the direction that you've went in is more of the history. I wanted to get more away from the secret societies and all this, kind of conspiracy stuff and darker stuff. But I don't know. I keep getting pulled back into it and I hate it. I hate it. It's really depressing. But you're a true history buff. I mean, you really enjoy history and you enjoy learning new stuff. And I think that's awesome because it's so lacking in our culture. And, even I talk about how, and I may have mentioned this to you in the past, but even like your average history buff, like say your old, everybody has that old uncle or somebody they know who's like into history. And he seems kind of weird, because most people do not care about the past. But even that guy, a lot of times, is only into kind of like pop culture, mainstream history. And you kind of have to, you know, I think you should learn that as well. But I think that also, maybe look at some of the books that are a little bit harder to find, a little bit less popular. And so you've done that a lot, and I think that's awesome. And I really like how you explain the books. You don't just read them like the easy way, like I do. You actually look over them, make notes, and explain them to people. And it's like you said, nobody. I mean, a lot of people are never going to read these books, so it's great. It's a
No.
great thing what you do.
But dude, you bring up such a good point about like the weird uncle, and it made me think of what's Jay Dyer's done the series so many times. It's like that. It's the
Oh,
weird director. It's in Minnesota, Twin Peaks, Twin Peaks.
okay.
But it made me think of the dad that owns the hotel. I think he like goes crazy at some point, but he's like a big Civil War buff, and he's like in his. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Have you seen Twin Peaks?
I've I've not. I've seen like the original one. I watched a little bit way back in the day, but I haven't
Okay.
seen the new one. I haven't rewatched it either.
Well, it's not like, but when he something happened, I don't know. He goes, but he he's a big Civil War buff fan, and so he's like running battles, with like he's got like figurines and like a big map, and like he's General Lee, and he's telling where their troops should go and stuff like that. And I was thinking there was always, I feel like someone in the family, like that was a normal man's hobby was like either World War II, Civil War. Probably, I feel like those two. Not, I don't think I remember. Maybe it was just because of time periods, World War One. But there's, there's that hobby is gone, dude.
Hmm.
No, like
Yeah.
old men, very few are, like love those types of topics, or at least I don't see them. There's so few left.
I don't know anyone else. I mean, I have a couple of friends that are close to my age, and they seem interested when I talk to them about stuff. I don't know. Maybe they're just humoring me, but but and I know that not everyone has the time, and a lot of times I think people wouldn't even know where to start once they like if they hear you and I kind of talking about something, they still don't know exactly where they would start to research because there's so much stuff out there. But yeah, you're right. It's a dying hobby for sure.
Yeah, it switched from that to Funko Pops. That's the switch that's been made.
Right?
That or Pokemon.
I saw he might have been TikTok, but it was pretty funny. It was like a short video, and he was talking about how I think actually it was a comedian. He didn't show the comedian, but he was doing this joke, and he's like talking about how older people, when they look back at photos, they would be like, "Well, this was my uncle with Lindbergh or some famous guy who had
Uh-huh.
just accomplished something fantastic or would accomplish something very interesting." And he said, like, this next generation, like, it's going to be like, well, here's my mom with a picture of her meal from the restaurant and
That's true.
things like that. So
That's true.
it's,
Oh, dude,
it's,
that
it's like we have all this information at our fingertips, even though there's a lot of censorship, but people are just not interested.
no. And there you're I mean and that was one thing I think, and I know we weren't talking about this topic, but there's been a lot of discuss. I mean, you did your show, your Zionist theories, and but it's because that type of pattern recognition. I'm trying to use the correct terms, phrases. It's exploding, dude. And I think we were we were texting earlier how Nick Fuentes was debating a very very popular left wing streamer, Destiny, on the Zionist question, and over 110,000 people tuned into that live stream. And it wasn't on like a hit. It was on this podcast called Fresh and Fit, which is it's ran by this like black guy. It's kind of a more like a pop culture
Mhm.
commentary thing. But I just was shocked that 110. And then I see people put polls up on Twitter like I forget who would you rather babysit your kid, a Nazi or a furry? And it was something like 94% picked. So it's the internet. It's even with the censorship, it is shocking to see how some people have taken advantage and are making these connections and having questions like, that is weird that this small group seems to have so much positions of power and things. So my point is, all this information, very few people go after it, but it is
Yeah.
growing in certain areas, in my opinion, in
Yeah,
some ways.
I agree. And it's kind of like we're getting used to it because, they're sprinkling it in with like TV and movies more, like the truth, I guess you would say. And things are not as hidden as they used to be. And I kind of wonder if that is actually making people like it's good in a way, but also is it making them apathetic, to it? Like, because I talk to people and some people, and they'll surprise me sometimes with some of the things that they know or they suggest. But then it's like you said, they don't really go much farther than that. They're kind of like, well, that's just the way it is. I can't do anything about it. And
Yeah.
and maybe that's the best way to be. I don't know. Not everybody can start a podcast and, try to get through to anyone who will listen, but
No, no, unless you're like, unless that's your job as a professional. You make enough that you can be a like Owen Benjamin type, or
yeah.
maybe, and even Sam Tripoli. He can't. I mean, he can't. I'm sure he has thoughts that he can't share because of advertisers and things like that. But yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. It seems to be more acceptable to say things that were definitely not acceptable 10 years ago.
hmm
But,
Yeah, and with the thing that you had mentioned about the Nick Fuentes and the subject that they had, were debating, I do see a lot more people talking about that in the last maybe 6 months or so, maybe even a year. And it's surprising because there's some people that are pretty informed about it. But, I don't know if it's going anywhere. I mean, I
mm,
think that the people are starting to just see it's easy to see once you start to, like you said, pattern recognition with that particular subject. Look at the last names, maybe look at the bloodlines and stuff like that, or maybe the NGOs that they belong to or whatever. It's pretty easy once you start to do it. And then once you do it, you're like, why didn't I do this before? How did I not recognize this? But But
It's true, dude. It's true. It's true. Well, I mean, and this is it's like, we were talking about how I was going to do the show kind of on the drugs and the mob, and I didn't do this some part on on because it's like part two of that book, the book I'm reading, The Politics of Heroin. But I don't think how many people realize the, everyone, when you think of the mafia, you think of the Italian mafia. Very few people will ever make this connection that it was actually the Jewish mafia that most likely ran the Italian mafia, if not created it. And if not, at minimum, some of the top dogs weren't Italian at all, and that's so, you look at all these mafia movies, all these mafia books, and this, people like Meyer Lansky, Arnold Rothstein, maybe they'll mention them briefly, but they never bring up that these were the guys that Meyer Lansky was, Luciano's right-hand man, probably boss. He was the one that helped I don't know if you know this story, but look at Luciano, he was 1930s, so pre-World War II, he was the biggest heroin dealer. He was making something like it's insane, like $12 million a month on prostitution. He had like a harem of like 4,000 women. And what he would do is he'd get them all addicted to heroin so they couldn't leave. What was the point I was going with this?
Oh, with the not being the Italian, the Italians weren't exactly the top.
Yeah, and Lansky. So when when the OSS, or when I guess that wasn't even them, was Naval Intelligence. When they wanted to stop, they were having issues with the docks. They were worried spies were sneaking in. There were strikes. Meyer Lansky was one of the guys they used to help connect with Lucky Luciano to get him out of prison. He was sentenced for like 126 years. They just pulled him out. But so it's something that's like so overlooked in especially mob culture. Just that connection, which is I never knew that until
I've only read just a little bit of that history, doing those shows on those we don't speak of, and also I remember reading about the Black Hand. Did that come up in the book?
Not yet, but I only know Black Hand from Franz Ferdinand, but go.
I'd read a couple of articles that connected a Jewish mafia called the Black Hand. Maybe there's more than one, I'm not sure, but and also I'd read a little bit about I didn't realize this either, but around the Prohibition time, or maybe it was right after, when things started to be legalized, there were quite a few of the main guys who were Jewish that had the making liquor. And I think there was some kind of I'm blanking kind of on the details, but there was some company that was really selling a lot, and it was really bad stuff, started making people sick and all that. So I had no idea about that history either. So
yeah. Interesting, dude.
I don't know if all things lead to Rome or they lead to somewhere else, but yeah, I'm really I know very little about, and like I've always assumed, well, not always, but in the last maybe 20, 25 years, I've assumed that the drugs that come in and out of the US are allowed to happen to a degree.
Yeah.
I mean,
if my brief, I talked about this. I couldn't sleep the other night, and I did a whole debate inside my head about the drug culture and how it started. But it's an amazing, literally, I can say this without a doubt, that the drug trade was revived by the OSS, by the CIA. There is a statistic. So you have opium's a major commodity for 200 years. We know Skull and Bones, I think Taft family, and was it the Russell family, or was it the Roosevelt family?
I think it was all three, actually.
Okay.
But definitely Roosevelt was a part of it for sure.
And they made their millions off of opium. They started Skull and Bones. All these people for 200 years, all these people got wicked rich. Britain was able to ravage China. And then once slavery ended, they needed a new crusade. And I think this was, 1870s, 1880s. So I think people, for the most part, they were trying to do what they thought that was right, because all these addicts were popping up everywhere. And that's another interesting thing was that, so, like the snake oil salesman, the snake oil, all of it contained opium, all of it. And everyone though would have their own patent. So they'd add whatever mystery thing to separate, but it was opium. There was whatever else they were adding did nothing. It was the opium that was the cure all. And so they had all this patent business was huge in the 1880s, 1890s in the US. I mean, more women were addicted to opium than men, which is an insane statistic. But so who was the largest advertiser in the newspapers was these patent companies, these companies selling opium. They were the largest newspaper advertisers. So their addiction rates are skyrocketing, right around 1900, but no one's talking about it. Why? Why isn't the press bringing it up? Because their biggest advertiser is these patent companies that are selling the heroin or selling the opium. And it's just history rhymes so well, because even then, when, the press wasn't completely, corporatized or whatever, ran by the same 5 people, even then the press wouldn't touch the pharma world. They let it go, because I mean, that's amazing thing that for over 120 years, the largest advertiser in mainstream media has been the pharmaceutical world. Like, isn't that crazy though? That's
It
insane.
really is. It's like some things never change. We're just repeating cycles,
Yeah, dude. It's just crazy to me. And but regardless though, after that, they start, the prohibition movement started getting hold. And I think it could be maybe one of two ways. It could have been the narrative being created, because that's what they always do, right? They give you something and you're like, for women's rights, like, women deserve, if they want to go to college, they should be able to. Yeah, we can agree with that. But really the goal is to get to the point of where feminism has brought us now. But so I think that was what the big prohibition movement was, the big push was for there was, look at all these abusive fathers, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, let's stop this. But they stopped it because these families that for 200 years had already made millions, countries made millions off of selling drugs. They knew if that they prohibit the sale of drugs, who's going to make the money? It's going to be these still families that control the courts, that control the protection, that have the connections. And they knew that was just going to skyrocket their prices, and at the same time make them look good. Like, oh no, we don't want everyone on drugs. We want everyone healthy and off of drugs. But they were aiding and abetting bringing these narcotics and alcohol into the specifically into the United States.
Yeah, that's like when eventually, they said, well, we want to make it safe, so we'll regulate everything. Regulate.
Right.
And of course, it's all these power players that are making the decisions that are, they're writing the regulations for the politicians most likely, and you know what I mean? It's like, and we're still seeing that again, obviously today too, because you know how it is. It's like we have these big bills, and a lot of times they get passed in a couple of days. There's no way they have time to read them. They don't know what's in them, and they vote on them anyway. And so,
dude, and we'll go back to the drugs, but I saw some short clip about the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. And the guy brought up how prior to just think of the power the public had prior to the Federal Reserve. If the United States government wanted to purchase something, they would have to sell bonds to the public to get the funding for whatever project they wanted. So if they wanted to, build a bridge, they would need to sell government bonds. And if the public wanted that bridge, they would buy the bonds. And that was how they funded these things. And so you look at the power that the public has. If we didn't want to fund Ukraine, you wouldn't buy the U.S. war bonds. And guess what? Then the U.S. cannot support Ukraine. And instead, then they trick, however they tricked the public then, I'm sure it wasn't too difficult. Then it switched. Now the government has there is no veto ability from the public. They have an unlimited credit from the same a lot of the same opium families to just get as much money as they want. It's just
Yeah. And let's, Congress has basically given up their war powers, their powers to regulate wars or approve wars. And a lot of times they don't even declare the wars anymore.
No.
So why declare them when you can still get the money to fund them? So
right, dude. I mean, I don't think George did for post 2001. Congress did. Was that a war? Congress? I don't know if Congress even.
I don't think
it was.
I don't think so. I don't think they may have declared it a war, but I don't think it officially was, because I'm pretty sure I remember reading that Congress didn't pass it. I don't think they've passed one since maybe before Vietnam, if I'm correct. Could have been the Korean War. I'm not sure for sure.
I don't know about Korean War.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, but
and just to relate, so you had alcohol prohibition. So that's what. So the prohibition that starts, the Al Capone era, that starts the criminal syndicates, the international criminal syndicates to get alcohol and heroin into the United States. So that was so you had, when it was legal, you had a large group, but it was legal. So not causing many issues. You have prohibition. This creates criminal syndicates. This creates a black market. This creates all this violence. And then you have, that's post World War I. Then you have World War II happens. And so at the time in pre-World War II, you have three groups that are bringing heroin and drugs in the United States. You have 80% of it coming from Shanghai and China. The other 20% is coming from the Corsican mafia, and a small section coming from the Sicilian mafia. So during World War II, though, the Corsicans, they aligned with the Nazis, so they lost. So their gang is utterly eviscerated. The Sicilians, Mussolini had 2 decades of destroying the Sicilian. They were done for. And then China, immediately after World War II, you have Mao Zedong, who comes in and he wipes out all the opium dealers. I think the statistic was he arrested something like 365,000 people. They did 900 public executions, 27,000 imprisonments, and just so now no opium's there. And so now we're post World War II. At this point, heroin was, prior to World War II, around 45% pure coming in the United States before it was cut. During the war, none of that heroin from Europe and from Asia was coming in. So the only heroin coming in was from Mexico, which was around 2 to 3% pure. It was total crap. And at the end of World War II, America had only 20,000 addicts. And I don't know what our population was at that time. It had to be, in the hundreds of million, or maybe 190, 80, 100 million. But 20, I mean, that's nothing, dude. 20,000, right. That's nothing. And so if you were a honest, good country, you would say, well, let's just finish this, dude. What, let's clean up. Let's get the rest of this figured out. Let's end this forever. But instead, what does the OSS do? They revive. They can't revive China because Mao's taken full power, but they get the neighboring areas, hence the Vietnam War, bombing Laos and all these other places. So that they started help. They give because they're broke third world countries. So they need guns, they need money, they need logistics. The CIA, OSS, CI provided all of those. But the Corsican and the Sicilian mafia, like I said, were totally demolished. And it would have taken, like, a local police force could have finished it. They would have dropped them down. But what happens, the OSS and the CIA, they go to the Corsican mafia and they say, here's a bunch of guns, here's a bunch of money. We're going to get you back the control of the docks, because there was a rising communist party for France. And the same thing with Italy. There's a rising communist party in Sicily. And so the CIA aligns with these two, the mafia and the Corsicans, and they build these groups back up from square one. And within 5 years, the international drug trade was started again. But that just like made me almost sad. Like you look at the videos you see of like my area, Kensington and Philadelphia, LA, of these zombies walking around, and they have another chance later, and we'll get to that down the road. But they had the chance to end it all, and they rose it again. Isn't that like that? Like that's just the perfect depiction of the United States government,
Yeah, the real depiction, the honest one. Can I ask you quickly? Like,
Yeah.
I've seen the name Corsican, and I'm just not sure. Are they from a particular? I mean, obviously they're from a particular place, but I'm not.
Yeah, so it's the Corsican. It's so Corsica, where Napoleon's from, my boy.
Okay, all right.
It's an island right there, like between Italy and it's by Italy, because it went back and forth between Italian control, French control. Corsicans they hated both of them, but so that's where kind of like this. It's kind of a lot like Sicily. It's an island that's super close.
Okay.
Who controls it? They want to be nationalistic. They don't want to be controlled by anybody. But that's why that's the Corsican mafia. And they were very known for heroin because France and the Marseille ports, that's where a lot of was coming out. But because France had colonized or had been in Southeast Asia and Vietnam and in all those, all those little countries there, which were growing the heroin. So that's why the Corsican. Have you ever seen The French Connection, the movie with Gene Hackman?
I've never seen it.
It's a classic, dude. It's one, but I forget when the movie made. But at the time, it was the largest heroin drug bust, and it was called The French Connection because it was the Corsican mob that was bringing in the heroin, and it was like only like a suitcase full. But yeah. So that's the Corsican mob. Is just the French mafia, basically.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for clearing that up. Because I've seen that name, and I think there was even a car back in the day, like a Chrysler or something, called the Corsica, and I've never looked it up to see, what the root of that was.
Yeah. I just, and that was another thing that's just totally random, but it's crazy how Napoleon, he was Corsican the same way that Mustache Man was Austrian, and both would become lead. And that's the one. So I will, I'm way off the Tartaria theory, but I did find that very ironic that two of these very similar history viewed people have a very similar backstory, that they would end up leading countries that were not their own country, and they're extremely nationalistic.
That is interesting. Just reminded me of something, because I know that the CIA has had a habit when they overthrow these smaller third world countries of putting a leader in that sometimes is not even from there. Like, I know they tried that with probably the latest one I could think of, and there may be even a more recent one, is Libya. The guy that they tried to put in charge once they, went over there and destroyed it, basically. He was a CIA asset. I can't remember where he was originally from, but he was living here. He was not a member of their country, and they rejected him. And they had formed something called like the Government of World Accord or something real creepy like that, and tried to force him on the people. But that's one of the things that they do. I just think that's kind of an interesting similarity there,
dude. Well, I didn't know that. Oh, Libya! What is such a sad, Gaddafi, just such a poor place, dude. So it doesn't shock. I wonder when they installed. I wonder if it was post Gaddafi or when they did that. But
it was post Gaddafi. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. But yeah, so they revive all these international drug connections all over the world, or with the two, and so that's what built the mob. And that's why J. Edgar Hoover, for 40 years, when was asked, is there an organized crime in America, he would laugh, and the media would laugh and mock and say there is no Cosa Nostra, no organized crime that exists in America. And they're saying this because they're working directly with the federal government. And there are so many stories about, before the DEA started, the organization was called the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. I think that was the name of something something FBN. And so they pick a director. It's this guy, Henry, I think, Anslinger. And Anslinger, he worked in naval intelligence during World War II. And at this time, post-war, a lot of the heroines, the Corsicans and the Sicilians, they weren't the growers. They would get the raw opium, and they had the labs to turn it into heroin, and then they had the connections to traffic it into America. Oh my God, Oddman. Again, I just forgot where was I going with this? I was start over in Asia. Oh, and so Anslinger, he's in charge, he's international. He is supposed to be the international drug guy to stop it all. And they identify the top 265 drug traffickers in the world. Again, 80, 90% of the heroin, opium being grown is from Southeast Asia at this time. And there was one name on this list of 265 people that resided in Southeast Asia. Everybody else was all over the world. So basically, and Anslinger, he sent his agents all over Europe, all over the world to become intel and to gather information. He sent not a single person to Southeast Asia. And then eventually the FBN, it gets so corrupted. I think he gets pushed out by Kennedy. And then eventually they have a huge corruption scandal. And then they create the DEA after that to try and create a new name. And the DEA, they are underneath the CIA. So all their drug arrests, so anytime it would get too close to a CIA agent, a CIA operation, they backed off. They wouldn't continue investigating. They just let it go. And so that's why you have the drug problem you have today, because I imagine the same system is in place where here's this guy's the biggest drug lord of whatever area. Can we go after him? Well, no, we can't, because he's a U.S. puppet that's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. It's just depressing,
Yeah. Well, what was I think he was a Mexican. I've got a little buzz in my mic here. What was his name? The guy that escaped prison.
El Chapo.
Yeah, this guy just escapes a maximum security prison. I mean, come on.
3 times. And the last one, I'm sure you remember how he rode out of prison on a motorcycle that was in a tunnel that was built underneath his prison cell. And yes, Mexico is a corrupt country, but it just reminds me of, like, this is America. This is American propaganda, dude. Like, to think that this guy, he's this multi-billionaire. So, okay, fine. They dig him out of prison. But the best part of the story, and you can look at the New York Times, there's a New York Times when they finally arrest him, because then the U.S. goes after him. And prior to that, the New York Times have reported how he rolls 400 deep, armed to the teeth. Everyone's terrified of him. And the United States government was able to arrest him without a single shot being fired. And if I am El Chapo, I'm a billionaire. I have more money than God. I have so many people that are going to die for me that I just let myself be taken without a fight. I know where I'm going. If it's the U.S., so the point I'm making is these people, these leaders of these drug organizations, they're controlled and ran they're put in place by the CIA. They're not just some crazy entrepreneur that slowly rises the ranks. Same with who was the Colombian? Who am I thinking of? Pablo Escobar.
Yeah.
Again, another example. Really, Pablo Escobar, he's slaughtering all these judges, supposedly. I mean, he's creating the quote unquote narco state, but the U.S. government can't take him out. And they eventually do, because once they get to a certain extent, then they have to look good, and who knows if they even kill him, right? I mean, we don't even, you never know that. But all these leaders, it's, in my opinion, it's a lie. They're not actual, these drug entrepreneurs. They're placed there because they're willing to play ball with the United States government, and they're willing to keep their mouths shut for a certain extent of time. And then once they serve their purpose, just like when we install a puppet leader, They get rid of him and they create a new one. And that's so it's another fake fear, the narco state thing. Like,
Yeah.
no, oh, Mexico's a narco state or is going to become a narco state. That doesn't make any sense, because if it was truly a narco state, then you wouldn't be able to arrest El Chapo. You wouldn't be able to do so many of these things. It's just another fear tactic that's just kind of like with North Korea, right? Like, oh, they're going to nuke us or whatever they say. This country, according to you guys, can't even feed its populace. It's so backwater. It's so confused, but yet they can create nukes. They have all these. How are they creating nukes? It's just a fear thing to justify spending, $800 billion a year on the military, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. I've always, for the longest time, thought that North Korea, there was some bullshit going on, because it just doesn't add up. And it's like one of their 3 or 4 countries. It's a go-to country to, to cause fear, North Korea, Iran, Russia, probably a couple more I'm not thinking of right now, but it's like their go-to, and
yeah. And that was another thing that, and so I wouldn't feel comfortable making the claim that every war post World War II has been about opium production and heroin production, but it's definitely in the top 3 reasons. This all Vietnam. It was in the Golden Triangle. That's where we were growing opium. And so eventually, once Vietnam ends, that was another thing. That's the hilarious part. All the heroin that's being grown in Southeast Asia, the press says it's the communists, ignoring the fact that the communists, the peasant army of Mao, chased out all of the drug dealers and drug users, killed them in China. But no, and I know the story of how Operation Gladio was started to help fund Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese nationalist, to fight the Chinese communists. They were growing opium, selling it, and that was how they provided the guns and the weapons for the nationalist army that's eventually ended up in Taiwan. So after the Vietnam War ends, they need a new place for opium production. So they decide, we're going to go Turkey in the Middle East. What's our next war after post-Vietnam? It's in Afghanistan. What's going on? That's where all the opium production is going. And so we both have heard the stories of the military guards protecting the opium fields in these countries. And so you can really follow all these dots, that all these wars, do they choose these places solely because it's chaos there? I don't know, but it's very weird how the majority of heroin and opium is coming from the countries that we just keep going into wars with, like Iran, like Afghanistan, and so forth. It's a conspiracy or just a coincidence. Oop, I think you're on mute.
I'm having trouble with this mic. My apologies.
Oh.
So I read a little bit in the book called Dope Inc. I think I'd mentioned that.
Oh, yeah. Before. I remember you told me you were reading that.
So I've read some excerpts from it. And this one section was talking about the Trilateral Commission. And it said that David Rockefeller, he'd started these NGOs. One was called the Council of the Americas. And he was just talking about how they'd gotten involved in these other countries, not for the reasons they say, of course, to help, political, kind of like mend political fences and kind of bring the world together. That might be part of it, but it was talking about how it's all about drugs. And it's what they're really working on, because there's so much money to be made in these other countries on, with selling drugs.
Dude, Pakistan. And I know so little. I feel like we're not on good terms with. Are we on good terms with Pakistan or no?
I think at least I think it's kind of like Rocky, because wasn't that where they supposedly found Bin Laden, and then we stormed in there, allegedly, to get him without any warning. We didn't tell the government and all that, and a lot of people are saying, well, Pakistan knew that he was living there for a long time. So I'm not real sure. I don't think they're our allies. But
Because so the CIA created the Pakistani CIA, whatever it's called, SDCSCE or something like that. But in Pakistan at the time in the 1980s, their GDP was $8 billion a year. $4 billion a year was their opium, and that's what was half of their their country's economy was opium production. I mean, that's that. Like, how could you imagine 4 billion? And now the drug industry alone, it's something like 400 to 500 billion dollars a year is made off of the drug, the black market and drug trade. And so to think that much money, that the bankers, that the power elite are just going to say, oh, that's good for these drug runners. They're gonna they can have the $600 billion a year. We don't need any of that. It's laughable to think that they're going to allow that. They're so free market. They love that they would allow that. It's absurd.
absolutely. I mean, that much money, I mean, the things what people would do, nefarious people would do to make that kind of money and keep that kind of money coming in. I don't think there's many limits to it. So, I mean, it's kind of like people that don't believe this stuff's true. Well, it's the drugs keep coming in no matter what is done. Obviously, there doesn't seem to be a real good attempt to kind of keep the drugs out of America. And, I've said for a long time, they could have done a lot of things, I think, as far as just the alleged drugs that are coming across the border of Mexico. I mean, they
lose you.
Oh no, man.
Test. Oh no.
Can you hear me? Oh no.
Can you hear me, man?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, all right. There we go. I got you. Sorry,
Back.
buddy.
Oh no.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
No problem whatsoever.
I lost you whenever you just started talking, so you're gonna have to repeat.
No, I was just saying that that amount of money, people would do a lot of things for that amount of money and to keep it coming in. And I don't think it's even that hard to think about. I mean, and these things have been going on for so long behind the scenes. We've been lied to. That they kind of paint this picture. It's almost like, like theater. They got to keep us thinking different things. Anything but the truth. Keep us distracted and keep our minds on other things. And people have just become so kind of dumb and kind of going along with whatever the media says. And like you said before, the media has been kind of part of the whole system really for the longest time. I read a few quotes from Thomas Jefferson a while back, and he was talking about then he was chastising the media because he said they were so horrible. So if it was horrible then, and I have some, I like some of the things Jefferson said, the founding fathers, you can't agree with everything they did, but
yeah,
some of the things they were, brilliant on. But yeah, obviously he was probably telling the truth because he was talking about how they were trying to divide the people. And of course they do that now on a major scale.
But it's just, and I'm sorry, I keep jumping back, but so the drug usage just continued to grow post World War II, and the justification was fighting communism and that they were only going to get black people addicted. That was I guess, how they slept at night. That was the lie they told. But that was another thing that I think I've asked this question to you so many times, and I think I'm getting the answer better, but it's hard to put together all this money being spent to fight communism when the direction we're going is this Marxist corporate socialist way. And because I'm sure you follow a few of like the conspiracy communist accounts, and I'm always like, how do you believe this? Like that does, that's the goal, is communism. And the more that I read and stuff like that, I can see why they fall under that, because you can almost use the same logic that we use for why they don't want monarchy, or why they don't want a true republic or a true free market capitalism. And the same logic can be applied to communism, because they spent all this drug, they created a drug enterprise and other things to fight communism. So clearly that, I mean, I just can't see that being the actual goal, right? I think that they have a fear. I think maybe because communism is, I don't know why that's their fear, even though it seems that's the way our country is going. But I don't think that is the goal, if that makes sense. I think it's a related closely, but not the same thing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I think that they definitely want to take elements of communism and also fascism, and I think it's like Carol Quigley and this guy Gary Allen. I think even Anthony C. Sutton may have talked about it, where they really don't care what type of government you call it, as long as they can use that system for their own ends.
Mm.
And so I don't think that it's hard for me to believe too that they are that against communism when it comes down to, what they really believe.
Yeah, yeah. And like, yes, they funded Lenin. Stalin's viewed pretty negatively in history, and even like the very left leaning people today, they still use that fear, or they'll say like, we hate communism, even though, and then the boomers on the right were like, oh, they're communist, but it's something in the middle there. That's not,
Yeah.
it's not they don't want communism. They obviously don't want a fully free market economic system. But I just, that helped me on, because that one guy, what's his Twitter account? We both follow him. I've never listened, but he's a brilliant guy.
I think
Jimmy Fallon Gong?
okay, yeah, that's who I thought you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, he's a brilliant guy, but he's a communist. And I always am like, dude, you know so much. How do you? But so I can see why you fall into that trap, because if you look at, especially the drug wars, South America, all these Operation Gladio, Condor, all these things, you can see why. I can see how you fall into that. Well, the government doesn't want communism because then they'll lose their power. The power elite don't want communism because they'll lose there's a chance they might lose their power or something.
Yeah, and I think that communism may be afraid too that with the people who stand to get the power and make the money, especially, that in a communist government, the power would be more centralized and they wouldn't be able to capitalize on that, which may very well be true. They seem to have it in for like Venezuela, for one. Of course, that could be because of the oil under the ground in Venezuela, but they've been trying to control and infiltrate the government there for years. Maybe they have by now, I don't know, but
yeah.
I talked about on one of the shows about that book I read on the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and most of those people, or at least the top ones, were Trotskyites. Everyone except for, I mean, there was a few exceptions. The one guy, what was his name? The guy that wrote the 13 Tribes or whatever.
Oh, Arthur something. Yeah.
Koestler. Yeah. So he was a staunch anti-communist, but the other guys were like, a bunch of them a couple of them had even worked for communists and had worked for the one guy, they call him he was kind of like the greatest Soviet propagandist ever, but people don't talk about him that much. Willy Munzberg. So a couple of those guys had even worked for Munzberg. And, when Stalin came to power, he was killing people and he was much different than Lenin and Trotsky.
Yes.
So they decided they were anti-communist. So they came over here. The OSS hired them to spread liberalism, or really Trotskyitism. It was kind of neo-Trotskyitism all across the world with all their magazines and stuff like that. So
interesting.
It's weird how that,
I'm not good enough to know, because I follow a few like commie accounts, and they'll call people like, oh, I'm a Trotskyite, or I'm a, Leninist, or I'm a whatever Marxist. But Stalin, and there's a few Stalin people, but I forget which book I read it in. But Stalin, he gets probably like the most hate into mainstream history. And the guy, whatever book it was in, he attributed that to that. Yes, Stalin was a communist, but he was a nationalist, most importantly. And so that's why he's not as viewed favorably among the communists and those groups. It's because he was he wasn't a national socialist, but he was a nationalist to an extent. So I wonder, was Marx and all these other people, they probably, all no one's illegal type of people.
That makes a
All
lot of
humans are legal.
That makes a lot of sense because nationalism for the longest has been the almost like the even before, you know, the mustache man, it's been the enemy, the major enemy of like the global elite. And I understand where, you can have, there's a fine line, but also to, at the other side of it, to try and make people feel guilty for being proud of where they came from and say they have no right to, to defend their own country and to want what's best for their own people. I mean, that is some BS because the people that are pushing against that, they're basically a lot of them, at the heart of it are just trying to get a better place for themselves,
Yes.
and they're fake. They're hypocrites to, to the
Yes.
core. So,
it's, that, and totally off, the ADL has a Twitter account, and they have, I'll make it like 75, 80,000 followers, or Stop Anti-Semitism. That's the account, has 80,000 followers. And there's another account called like Stop Anti-White Hate. And it just broke over 120,000 Twitter followers. And that it just got me thinking, like, how much of our beliefs, and we know this, but are so astroturfed that they want to alienate you, make you think you're a crazy person or a racist or a bigot, when in reality, it's probably the majority feel this way. The smaller percentage are on this side of the fence. But isn't that,
absolutely.
I just found that fun. Like they smashed them, and
yeah,
and maybe an excuse would be like, oh, well, it's people that hate that are following that account, but I follow Stop Anti-Semitism as account. And I don't believe, I don't subscribe to this, that if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite or whatever. So it's kind of going back to whatever we were talking about, or how things are changed. I think things are changing. Oh, how 110,000 people are watching live about this topic. I do think that that's their biggest fear, is that they realize more and more people realize that we share the similar beliefs.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah.
not to get deeply into that subject, but and they'll say this. They've said this for years too. When you call that group of people we're talking about cosmopolitans, they say that's anti-Semitic too. But it's just the truth because so many of them have come from different places, and you can even read that in some of their own books where they talk about how they've never felt like any place was their home. So you know what I mean. So it would make sense that they don't have, especially if you go back and you look at some of these guys from the group we're talking about that made so much money, came over here and became such power players. They didn't have that love towards America like we did. They didn't have that patriotism. It was just another country that they could use to make money,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that could even be said probably about, what was the guy, Carnegie. He wasn't from here, and they said that he once said that he'd never met a socialist he didn't like. A lot of those
Wait,
guys, they
they said,
just
who said, JP Morgan, or who, Carnegie said that?
allegedly, yeah, I had read that in a
That's funny.
book. So, and we know the Rockefellers, of course, have been close to, Rockefeller and Nixon, I think, are probably at least partially to blame for having the open trade with China that killed thousands upon thousands of jobs. So,
Oh, dude. And that was and Nixon came up in the drug book because so prohibition didn't work, it exploded everything. So after they stopped putting billions into prohibition, they started putting billions into eradication. And at the time, of the Nixon administration. I think they were spending they had a budget of $2 billion a year, and 1.2 billion of it was spent on eradication. And so what they would do is they went to Turkey at this point, because that was now who was growing most of the heroin, and they would spray the fields or whatever, only to, and they knew, I'm sure they knew this would happen, but all this, so you would think, okay, they burned all the crops, it's over. Production that in the next year increased by 30%. So, and like, so these every tactic, it's just the point I'm making is it's almost like the NASA, you just they give these groups billions of dollars that are spent whichever way they are, knowing that they're only going to increase production or increase the issue that they're allegedly trying to stop. But I just found that ironic that 80% was spent on this eradication of this billions of just, dousing crops, burning fields. And the next year it increased 25% of, and that's Afghanistan's the same story. When we first got there, it was like 2,000 tons. In 10 years, they were up to 20,000 tons of opium they were making a year. Like, how does that work? All of our American soldiers are there. We're having a war. How is production increased, doubling? It's just,
it's crazy, man.
Yeah.
You go back and look at that one guy they said was the highest decorated military man of his time, Smedley Butler, and he had that book. What was it called?
Yes.
War is a Racket.
Yes.
It's like a real short book, but he talks in there about how he was all about all the things that they had him do, and it was pre-World War I or maybe pre-World War II.
Okay.
That he had served for 33 years. Ding, 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 ding. Here we go.
Nice. Very nice.
But
you got the bell. I love it.
But he talks about how he had went to war for basically sugar companies and banana companies and different things like that, and it's the truth. I mean, it's either heroin or it is one of these like mineral, like a rare mineral or an expensive mineral. I mean, there's just no way around it. We don't go to war for the reasons they say we do.
No.
Have to, if we did, they wouldn't have to spend millions of, or at least thousands upon thousands of dollars on propaganda to convince us, that we have to go.
Right. Or if you would, we would win wars. I mean, we haven't won. You wouldn't have a 20-year war in a jungle. If the goal was to win, you should be able, you just beat, Nazi Germany, Japan, you beat half the world, but now you can't beat a third world people living in huts, jungle country.
Yeah, exactly. You're the greatest.
You're not trying hard enough or something, guys, because you have an unlimited budget. These people are using the bombs that didn't go off and rewiring them and booby trapping them, and you're losing to them. Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
No.
And Washington didn't even want the generals to win that war. They wouldn't let them do the things they needed to do to actually win a lot of times. And I think that was the first one where they really got to experiment a lot. Like they've always used our men as pawns to a degree, but they really did it then, I think, unfortunately.
Yes. I think that was definitely the catalyst, because I don't know much about Korea. But I think Korea, maybe it was just another moneymaker. Maybe it was the actual fear of communism. But yeah, Vietnam was that set the precedent for the next, whatever, 50, 60 years of what wars are going to be like. These limited warfare, forever wars that are just going to be cash cows forever.
Yeah, with no real exit strategy, no real winning strategy. What does winning look like? We don't even know. They don't even tell the people because they don't know themselves. I mean, they don't want to win in the way that they're trying to portray to us. Their idea of winning is the funding and what they can get done during the process. And like you said, with all the drugs, and It's just unbelievable. I
I don't know
mean,
how they even grow them. And I guess, people join the military because and fewer are joining, and they don't, it's not, they'll never fight another conventional warfare war again. So I guess you don't need as many people joining the military anymore, but I don't know how you would do it. If this day, I mean, like the normal people that join the military, right? Lower class white people, predominantly from the South. I mean,
yep.
how do you sign up for that anymore, dude?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they had to, they spent so much time convincing, especially people from the South, and a lot of these people have been Christians, that joined the wars and stuff. They had to propagandize the hell out of them to make them think they were fighting for a worthy cause, of course, because if they knew, what was at the heart of the reasons that we were, going to war, they would never join. And so they've had to keep that facade of patriotism and, love your country cares about you, and, the loyalty to the flag by pledging allegiance every morning at school and stuff like that. You know, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that to a degree, but I think that if you're going to do that, you need to teach true history to the kids, which will
Oh yeah.
never ever happen.
No,
And
no. And not to
so,
say kids remember any of the history anyway.
oh
It's
yeah, yeah.
oh dude. Yeah.
So
I'm
we're
tring to
coming up
think
on.
of
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I
go
know
ahead.
I'm just if I'll see if I have any other big thing to drop the so like I said, so we could have ended addiction then, could have ended it post in 1970. We'll end here, but with the heroin also dropped, totally fell off in the early 19 like 72 or 73. It went down to the lowest rates again that the world had seen. So it's round two to end heroin, the international heroin drug trade, everything like that. Oh yes, it was. And that was in seven. And then it was in 79. The DA reduced heroin from the DA. We'll just say that, but fine. 500,000 kilos to 200,000. It was dry, and it was because it was all coming from Afghanistan. And what happens in 1979? The CIA starts backing Afghani warlords. And I don't know when the first Gulf War started or when Russia got involved in Afghanistan, but that's then after that moment, what do you know? It doubles, triples, quadruples production rates, and then we're and now this day and age, they don't need these opium wars because fentanyl is just created in a lab. It just needs a precursor. It doesn't need opium, and so now they don't need to use this tactic anymore. But it's a fascinating thing how drugs have literally built the world. They built they built globalism was because of the drug trade. So I'll end with that.
No, that's great. I mean, it's not great, of course, but it's a great job on your part. And
Oh,
uh,
thanks, dude.
it's sad, man. It really is sad to think about what they've done to us. And going back to the East India Company, the British East India Company, like you were saying earlier on, they addicted China, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrible, and they made so much money. Like that went on for what, a couple 100 years or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. For
So,
like 150, 200 years.
this thing is not new. It's never stopped, and I feel like a lot of these things that we used to have, what they would call pirates and mobsters, and now these guys wear suits and ties and work for these huge companies and also work for these government agencies. So that's where we are. We haven't changed that much. It's just changed the way they've changed the way things look. They've changed the structure a
Exactly.
little bit. It's the
Exactly.
same old thing because unfortunately people, a lot of people do want drugs, and if they have to make, they want addictive substances because that's customers. And so
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
they want us addicted to their chemicals and their drugs and everything else.
Much easier to control that type of person than one that's not addicted, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's more than, I'll say quickly too, obviously there's more It's not, a lot of things can be drugs. A lot of things that they sell you can be
Great point.
drug-like, that they want you addicted
Great
to,
point.
different products and stuff
Great
like that.
point. Yeah, it doesn't need to be heroin. It can be porn. It can be junk food, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks, man. Thank you so much for being on, and I'd love to have you on again pretty soon to talk about whatever you're into at the time.
Hey, anytime. Odd man, you've been on my show so many times, dude. And I'm glad I could help. I know how hard it is to keep reading and get notes out. So I'm glad hopefully I gave you a decent show here.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Yeah, it's um I've been slow at getting to my next show, so this is awesome. I can take my time and finish it the way I want and put this one
Good, dude.
out, and
Good.
people will be able to, I think people will really be into this because you told us a lot of history that I wasn't aware of. I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of.
Oh, good, dude. Good.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, will you tell us how to find you and tell us how
Yes.
to listen to or watch your
Yes.
show?
My show is called Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. And that's why my Twitter handle is at COJAC Podcast. So if you want to follow me there. And that's it. That's my plug at COJAC Podcasts. And thanks for having me on, dude. I'm so happy I finally got to return the favor. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. And yeah, he's a great follow on Twitter. So definitely follow me if you're on there. He'll make you think. He might make you mad.
I don't know about that. Oh, that's fun.
All right, man.
All right.
We'll be talking to you soon. People, remember, their order is not our order. See you guys.